Hi, fantasy readers. This is Corinne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. You'll want to stick around for today's story if you like vast worlds, prequels, and dragons. It's written by Jasmine Young, a noble dark fantasy author. She first dreamed of becoming published after devouring Aragon in a few days on her grandma's couch at the age of 13, and now she has over 15 titles under her belt. When she's not reminiscing about her gaming days or getting lost in old epics like Lord of the Rings, Jasmine writes a blend of epic, romantic, dark, and progression fantasy to entertain and empower, especially the underdogs. Today's narrator is Paeter Frandsen, host of Christian Geek Central. Stick around to the end or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from both the author and the narrator. For now, please enjoy A Descent of Dragons by Jasmine Young.
The scorchfall that would bring the second breaking of the realms began in a cairn leading deep beneath the earth. Precisely, it began with an egg. A common eye might have mistaken it for a dragon egg, for that is what it appeared, yet this was no unborn dragon, but something far more pernicious. The dwarves and high elves would have known its true nature by the shade of its scales. They were blacker than gall, fouler than the ichor that fills a demon. If one looked closely, he would see that the pattern of its scales assumed its name in the Norsen runes. Every 8 heartbeats, the egg pulsed with a cataclysmic power. Depending on the strike of the magma's glow, for there was no sun this deep inside Adelgard, the egg flared like living cinders. Inside this egg was the last Bale, the mightiest of all the realm breakers. Tens of thousands of dwarves and elves would have tossed in their tombs, knowing this species was not extinct after all. 1,000 solstices ago, their realms were the first of the 9 to be sundered by these dragon imitators. This was the divine war known as the First Breaking. Dragons were fierce creatures, certainly, but dragons did not have the power to break the veilings between worlds. Dragons had neither the ability nor appetite to control and break minds, but the Bales did. This little egg, warmed by outflows of magma, beheld the fate of Midgard, the last habitable realm, the realm of men. For in this present day, the egg was found. Inside the shell, the last Bale slept. Though it had been an age since the first breaking, ghost memories of the monolithic event drifted in his mind. They were a haunt that oscillated a song into his soul script. His parents were dead, but the remnant energies of their scripts, like restless souls, still traversed the earth. Certainly, they were imprinted in his own pulsing helix of life-light. What touched the egg and interrupted his dreams was neither elf, dwarf, nor man. The Bale's eyes burst open. Something was forcing him to wake inside the shell, though he was unwilling. He had never meant to hatch. The dreams of what his parents had done to the other races so terrorized him that his unborn mind had decided a millennium ago that another Bale would never walk the 9 realms again. He wrestled against the being impelling him to emerge. What power in the world could force a Bale to hatch? The draconian breed always hatched in its own time. The pandemonium of noise roared through his shell. It felt like he was quaking inside labor pains. Though it did not hurt him, the pulling, squeezing, pulling, squeezing was a violence that blinded him with fear. On the other side of his shell, the shadow that stood over him spoke in his mother tongue, Norsen. It was the tongue of Adelgard, realm of the breakers, and the first speech of all worlds. The atonal voice was deeper than an abyss. The Bale shrieked inside his egg. He became vaguely aware of his mortal form, his claws, legs, wings, snout, but there was no room to thrash. He would not come out. No, he would not. The being outside was not only inducing him to hatch, but forcing a binding with his soul script. In his parents' memories, he had seen dragons in Midgard bind with humans upon a touch to their egg. A binding merged two souls and could not be undone, save for death. When a dragon chose to bind with a biped, the latter was called its rider. The Bael's parents had scorned dragons for this reason, seeing them as a lesser species, for binded dragons allowed their riders to saddle them like the dumb hoofed beasts. Binded dragons were mounted and commanded. Dragons that binded with riders were all but their thralls. Baels. Baels did not bind. It had never been done before, though covetous elves and men had tried during the first breaking. Their minds had been too weak. Nothing in existence could dominate a Bael's mind. A Bael was the greatest of all the races, the mightiest of the world cleavers. Yet this force sank its colliginous talons deeper into his script. Already he felt the tendrils of their souls fusing. The Bael shrieked louder, attempting to flap his wings. The darkness around him cracked into bright honeycombs.
"You shall be our Bael, and we will be your master, the first of the Bael Riders."
The abyssal voice was mind-speaking to him in Norsen.
"Ours will be the greatest binding known to the rune."
The Bael flailed in hysteria, thrashing against the being's mind control. Even as a Baeling, his mind should be stronger than anything in existence. Yet the force continued to master him. The pulling and inducing started to hurt. His new rider was punishing him for refusing to come out. The darkness that had swaddled him for 1,000 solstices burst into shards. The Bael screeched, crashing onto his front claws. His cumbersome, oversized bat wings splayed over the bedrock, slick from his birthing fluids. He waggled his head, trying to see. The air tasted strange, too crisp and dramatic to the unaccustomed pump of his lungs. Survival instinct forced him to part his inner eyelid membrane and look upon the world, for the first time, with his bare eyes. The magma's blaze stung him brilliantly. This was a place where only fire and bedrock existed. Outflows of liquid fire forked around him. He reeled in a circle, cutting his tender feet over broken egg shards. The Bael wailed for his parents, but his parents were long dead. What surrounded him were misshapen specters with eyes burning like singular white flames. Upon the Bael's gaze, the Norsen runes branding their faces enlivened into an otherworldly glow. Each had a unique pattern of tattoos that distinguished one from the other. Like the runes that had inscribed his egg, these glyphs betrayed their names to his Bael eyes. Zithrax, Azrakil, Vorloth, Aelhil, Athraval, Sionel, Ondoviel, Zeraxis. He knew these names as intimately as the old memories of his parents. A last name entered his mind, Foul Kaidir. It was the ancient Norsen word for the fallen, for these were a fallen pantheon of elite mages. They had forsworn high kings and great empires to serve his father during the breaking of the realms. The hatchling almost made out their true forms behind their warding shadows, what appeared to be elvish frames, before their smoking veils exploded into vaporous cinders and reappeared elsewhere. Their fell energy only worsened his hysteria. Tripping over his wings, he turned to the one looming over him, the rider that he had not chosen. This was a shadow even more ponderous than the rest. Unlike the others, he was faceless, burning in a dreadful void.
"What is your name?"
The Bael scrambled backwards. Even now, ever more of its baneful presence was ripping through his infant script, seaming more of his soul threads with its own. The Bael wailed in anguish. In his parents' memories, a biped and dragon's binding always formed out of love. but this shadow was ravaging his sovereignty and chaining him to itself. The bale mewled helplessly. No one could hear. His kind had lost the divine war. All but him were dead.
"What is your name, Bale?"
The hatchling cried back with his mind. "Help!"
"But we can see it. We can read it in your script."
"Help!" he cried.
"Our binding is nearly complete. Do you feel it? We shall be binded forever, for our name is Atalgard."
"Help! Help!"
"We will bear your powers. Come!"
The last command was a roar that blasted across the cairn. He was too frightened to try to read the name on this fallen one's facial glyphs. Turning on his claws, the hatchling clumsily beat his wings and leapt off his nest stone. He crashed in a pool of magma, though earth fire did not burn a bale's scales. The shadows around him rippled, detonating and reforming new echoing shadows all at once. Desperately, he searched for the memories in his scripts for how to fly. Bales, like the dragon breed, could not make use of their wings until their first 8 weeks, but in his memories he saw the way his royal father had with ease and grace beat his mighty wings, conflagrating leather that spanned 800 feet. He picked himself up and tried again, squawking as his rider squeezed him through their incomplete binding. "Help!" he cried as he soared blindly through the cavern. He crashed against the stalactites, beat his body against brimstone ceilings and crags. "Help! Help!" His parents' memories guided him up, up, up toward the surface of Atalgard's smoking earth. As he ascended, he passed a cavern buried inside the bedrock. The tremendous, dusted skeleton of a horned bale curled over the dust. His mother. The hatchling wailed and pounded his wings harder. A sphere of skylight rushed up to him. The hatchling burst out into the skies. His little heart was pumping so fast, at any moment it might burst. He glanced back at the cairn's entrance, a doorway inside a stone mountain leading into darkness. Before him was the Mount of Uthgoraholm. Yes, that was the cursed name. This was his birthing place, and his father's before him. At any moment the burnt voids would emerge. His dreadful rider would come for him. The hatchling unfurled his wings again and zipped over colossal lava falls. Bruised lavender clouds churned above him. Atalgard knew only 2 times of day, twilight and the black night. Behind the clouds, the firmament was always a lugubrious plain of smoke. It smelled of smoke, too. Smoke, burnt rock, and brimstone. It was little wonder his ancestors had broken into the lower realms. Atalgard's desolation had driven them all mad. Raving hunger pulled at his belly. The contractions were so insufferable, if his malignant rider offered him fresh meat, he might consider turning back. All he had to eat in his home was charred basalt, an eternal punishment from his creator for what he was. Soaring past the burning wasteland, the hatchling frantically searched for a warren to hide in. The various eruptions across Atalgard catapulted chunks of fire across the dark sky. Always they were streaking. His mother had thought the landscape beautiful, but he hated it. He hated his home world. He found a crevasse between the rock shards below and was about to land, but a Norsen call roared through their unfinished binding. The hatchling screamed. The Void One was close. This was supposed to be a world ruled by the Bales, but with the Bales all gone, somehow, those void breakers had survived and multiplied. Atalgard was no longer his. It was theirs. It occurred to him that so long as he remained in the 8th realm, his rider would eventually find him. The Void One's only purpose now was to complete their binding. He had to find a way to escape Atalgard. It was said that Veritas, the creator of the realms, had restored the veilings after the Bales were defeated during the first breaking. But the hatchling had seen through his father's memories that sections of Adelgard's veiling were weak. Veritas had barely patched it after the hatchling's father had torn him from his divine throne in Aethragard, the ninth realm, and into mortality. Instinctively, the hatchling drew upon his latent powers and studied the landscape with his heightened Bale sight. Veritas had built the 9 realms with the rune, the source of all magical power. Just like his soul script, the world was made of rune scripts, or infinite verses of divine Norsen runes. These scripts were boundless, running parallel and perpendicular across the earth in infinite braids. They codified the universe. They told every realm's story. That was how the Bales had managed to break it. They had the sight to see these rune scripts and destroy them. The hatchling searched and searched for a kink in the braids. He soared tirelessly over the bubbling earth. Terror kept him pushing himself to the edge of his reserves. All the braids he saw were locked tight, like fetters keeping him in Adelgard. Entire wastelands spanning the horizon bore only Veritas's perfect, undulating lines of Norsen script. Twilight faded into night. The hatchling kept flying, though his panting grew labored. His heart told him he would come to a baneful end, and so would the surviving races in the 9 realms, if he allowed the Void One to subjugate him and ride him as a full-grown Bale. In the early hours of dawn, which was twilight again in Adelgard, the hatchling at last collapsed on an overlook. His body crumpled. His overused lungs could barely pump. He had overexerted himself to the brink of death. But perhaps that was for the best. He had never wanted to hatch. As the infant lay there, despairing quietly, a sight far below caught his eye. It was barely perceptible, but 2 runes were missing from a braid running just below the overlook. It was a tiny break. Would it be enough to form a rupture? It was his only hope. With arduous effort, the hatchling hauled himself off his claws and doddered to the overlook's edge. He would stay here for a little longer, he decided, just until he caught his breath. The air behind him rippled. Terrified, the hatchling whirled around. Behind him, stepping out of a burning portal, was the Void One. The fires burning from his facial markings strobed the hatchling with smoldering light. Backlit by those living flames, his void frame seemed blacker, even more sinister than in the cairn. The Bale found the courage to look straight into that void and read the glyphs on his face. A final name entered his mind. Atalandir. This was an echo of the foulest memories that lingered in the forgotten places of the 9 realms. And suddenly, the Bale remembered. During the breaking of the realms, his father had given this elvish mage a new name and chosen him to become his right-hand thrall. Many fallen had served in his father's name, but his father had only ever spoken directly with Atalandir. His living presence stunned the hatchling. Even in his parents' memories, he had seen the Lord of the Fallen die alongside his father. At the end of the breaking, they had lain side by side in an abyssal gorge, a titan with broken wings dwarfing the elf bleeding out on his back. Every surviving elder dragon had witnessed Isildur, champion of Ilendor, drive a blade through his heart at the final battle. It was impossible Atalandir could still be alive. His father's thrall extended a hand, mind-thundering in Norsen. The ancient elf was drawing a runic spell that would seal the last threads of their binding. The hatchling raised his neck to the sky and keened. It was a secret known only to the Bale that the relations between his father and Atalandir had been over-complex. They had hated each other as much as they had loved each other. But in the end, an enslaved mind could not love his master, not entirely or with sincerity. That thrall was returning in a vengeance to claim the last Bale. The hatchling desperately wanted his dread father. He wished an adult Baal were here to break this wicked spirit that wanted only to enslave him, to destroy, as his father had once wanted from a Talandir. When they were one thread away from a complete binding, anger suddenly sweltered in the hatchling's heart. He was a Baal. He was the heir of the mighty Emperor Baalerix. He would not let the fallen lord collar his soul. With his last strength, the hatchling wrenched himself free from a Talandir's pull and leapt off the cliff. He used what innate powers he had as a breaker and enveloped himself in a new egg, a stronger one. This was a shell made of the fires of Adelgard. As he was a being of the second highest realm, it would be exponentially more powerful than the veilings of the lower worlds. The heat shield raced over him. With all his might, he dove at the missing runes. His force was strong enough to shatter the braid open. More runes collided with each other and exploded. His egg shield quaked. The little break in this section of Adelgard was causing the whole wasteland to violently tremor. The hatchling parted his jaws in fear, but he cleaved on to his shield. As he fell through the vacuous break in the braid, the Norsen script portaled him out of Adelgard. And he was falling. He was falling upside down, streaming down a sky that was a jaundiced blue. Vaguely, he could see through the frantic rush of his shield energies. He was falling through the heavens of Molnegard, the seventh realm, the home world of the elves. "Help! Help!" he cried. No one answered. Like Adelgard, Molnegard was desolate, purged 1 millennium ago by his ancestors during the breaking. The hatchling resolved himself to keep falling, terrified as the descent was. Somewhere in the 9 realms, there had to be someone who could help him. As his plunge accelerated, gaining ethereal fire and momentum, striking the next veiling was easier. More runes shattered apart, Norsen script that no one but Veritas would ever be able to repair. But Veritas was dead. Veritas had fallen to his father. The blueness of the firmament was more concentrated in this realm, though it was still faded and wearied. Now he was descending through Violgard, the realm of the dwarves. "Help!" There came no answer out here either. No, his father's breaking had sundered the veilings beneath Adelgard so violently the dwarves and elves had perished, or they had fallen into the lower realms. The hatchling was descending even faster now. Terror reaved his heart, but he had no choice but to keep going, keep searching. Breaking into this second lower world was strengthening his fiery egg shield, compounding the energies he had accumulated from Molnegard and Adelgard. Soon he struck another veiling. The rune script shattering open Drakegard, homeworld of the dragons, was a force so great the very skies seemed to implode. An invisible ripple blasted over the earth far below. "Help! Help!" Through his rushing fear, he was heartened to find the first signs of life. Wild dragons looked up from their perches, though most were scattering. The destruction of his fall petrified them. Wings rushed everywhere. Most dragons were 10 times or more smaller than a grown Baal, but he still hoped. Baals and dragons were more alike than any other race. Perhaps a she-dragon would take pity on him and nest him as her own. "Help!" he screeched desperately. Only one dragon, a giant male the size of a small mountain, found enough metal to roar at him. It knew what he was. They all did. If he slowed his fall enough to land in Drakegard, they would kill him. The hatchling caterwauled above the bedlam. If he could not land here, then he had only one hope of survival left, in Midgard, the realm of men. The last 3 realms beneath were uninhabitable, worlds where energetic detritus, dead-feeders, and demons dwelled. The male launched himself into the air and chased him, but the hatchling channeled harder, strengthening his shield. He had now fallen through 3 realms, each time gaining more momentum. When he broke through the 4th, it would be utter devastation. He prepared for the impact. His blazing egg shield just missed the swooping maws of the grown male, and then he shattered through another braid of runes. The next time the hatchling could see, a nova of light blasted across this new sky. Midgard's firmament was burning. He streamed downward, streaking behind him a scorch of concentrated energy. "Help!" he screamed. "Help! Help!" Everything was in an uproar. He could no longer hear his own shrills. The fall hurled him violently against the walls of his egg shield. He did not know which way was upright anymore. Someone answered his plea. It did not come in words, but as a conscious thread that linked with his mind. Whoever it was, they heard him. They were receiving him. The hatchling stopped screaming. He sensed Adelgard energies there, albeit that was impossible. How could a realm breaker exist in the middle realm? He was uncertain if they were friend or foe, but he decided to cling to their mind channel. It was all he had. Certainly, this human was far better than the Void One. Against the prodigious energies of his fall, he laboriously turned his egg shield in the human's direction. As he plummeted faster, scorching more of Midgard's skies, he became only aware of one thing: his terror. The heavens were different out here, a gray crystal and very cold. Flurried winds howled at him. Surrounded by ocean, the vast continent he streamed toward was aslant, patched in dark verts and whites. The closer he fell, the more its earth materialized into a bountiful boreal forest, ice sheets, and islands gleaming with lights. The human was somewhere in one of those villages, but his shield was falling too far out. He could no longer control it. Below him stretched a white glacier that had no end. As he drew closer, his eyes stinging, he saw more runes. But these were different from the little glowing motes that formed the braids in a veiling. They were titanic horrors that engraved themselves in a foreign realm. Foul rune. They were forming because of him. Every time a breaker invaded a realm, it disrupted the local world's energies so much that their fall incised Norsen rune scars into the earth. Every swirling foul rune assumed the soul patterns of the breaker that fell through. It distraught him that his presence was damaging this lower realm so much. He had not meant to cause destruction, but what disturbed him more than anything was that these foul rune were too numerous to have come only from him. Time must not move linearly between the realms, he realized. He was not the only breaker to have come through. The Void Ones had already arrived. His rider's thralls were waiting for him. The hatchling attempted to beat his wings to slow his fall, but his shield enclosed him. Suddenly, he was uncertain if he would even survive the crash. "Help!" he begged through the channel he had with that strange, nameless human. "Help! Help!" His egg shield made impact in the evergreen forest. The rip-roaring energy that blasted from him was so vast, it tore his consciousness from him. Just before his connection with the human severed, he saw her in his mind, a skinny, small-framed girl with the quiescence of a wolf and glowing eyes that burned like pale fire in the dark. Friend or foe, he did not know. She was coming for him.
I hope you enjoyed listening to A Descent of Dragons by Jasmine Young, narrated by Paeter Frandsen of Christian Geek Central. If you want to read more by Jasmine, go to jasmineyoungauthor.com to find more of her books. And if you enjoyed this story in particular, it's a prequel to her Realmbreaker series, so you'll want to start with the first book called A Breaking of Realms. I'll have a direct link to both her site and that book in the show notes. If you enjoyed listening to Paeter narrate the story, you might also enjoy listening to his audio dramas at spiritblade.com or his podcast, Christian Geek Central, where he discusses movies, video games, and all things enjoyed by self-proclaimed geeks from a Christian worldview. Which fantasy-loving reader friend do you need to send this story to? With over 120 episodes, you're basically gifting them a dozen audiobooks. Don't keep this to yourself. I have links in the show notes to make sharing the podcast as easy as possible for you. Thank you all for listening, and happy reading.